Hey, everybody, it is Lisa with It's Not That Hard to Homeschool podcast. We believe that every parent can confidently, and even contentedly homeschool their kids. I am here today with two very special guests, my friend Angie Ferrell and my friend Julia Jinks, who also happen to be teachers at True North Academy. Now, today we're going to be talking about American exceptionalism and the American story as we head into the 250th birthday of America. But before we do that, I want you to just hear from Angie and Julia and get to know them for a minute. So, Angie, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
How did I know you were going to pick me first? All right.
Because you're on
Well,
the top of my screen.
my background's kind of interesting as an American history teacher in that I spent almost 20 years in mental health. So that's kind of a strange crossover, but it's an interesting story. When I left mental health to become a homeschooler, I started asking a lot of questions about education. What is the purpose of education? What does a good education look like? All these things. And when I came to the conclusion that the modern education system was really off track, and started digging deeply into that for my own children, I realized that maybe I had a heart to want to do this more so in the future. So I went back to school as my children aged out, started to graduate, and got a master's in education. And interestingly, I actually did a project in college on storytelling. And I had no idea that this would sort of open my idea or my mind to the idea of storytelling, not just through books, but through history, and how that answered the question for me about what the value of education was, which is that passing on of values, right? The transmission of culture. And so it really got me thinking a lot about how I wanted to fit into education as I moved back into the workforce, and the idea that I wanted to be a part of that transmission of culture. And so American history fits perfectly into that. When you think about from the beginning of time, we've been sitting around the fire telling great stories, right? And they might be real stories of history and they might be fictional stories of literature, but there's still those stories that tell about our heroes and our challenges and our victories, and those are the things that inspire the next generation. So I wanted to be a part of that. And I actually went back to work during the pandemic, which was quite an interesting challenge.
Mhm.
And I've just had a passion for teaching ever since then. So I'm really excited about being able to be a part of that with you, and on our 250th for sure.
That's awesome. Thanks. Julia, can you just tell people who you are and why you're teaching American Lit and Comp?
So my name is Julia Jinks, and I am teaching American Lit and Pop. I have four children, and when I was homeschooling them from the very start, we just struggled so much with writing. And so I'm a writer, and I love to help them write. And writing their stories is so important. But I think it's so important for kids to read the classics, the American literature classics, along with learning how to do some really interesting writing. And I think that reading stories, just like Angie said, is so important for kids to understand where America has come from and where America is going and their part in the American story. So I really think it's important. I wouldn't say all of the great books that we read are great, but they do teach us a lesson about truth, and there's contradictions, there's complexities. How do they measure things as they go through their world and their life? And I think there's a lot of great discussions that we have in the class where they really wrestle with these books and whether or not they are great, and what things and what flaws they do have, because we know that there is one truth ultimately. And hopefully all of our conversations get back to that one truth, seeing the flawed characters and the things that they do.
I love that. Julia, you failed to mention that you're a former news producer and you have written for HGTV. So I think that you bring that richness to your classes that a lot of us don't have that perspective. And I just wanted to mention that because I think that's really an important um, perspective that you bring to the classes that you teach. And we all benefit when you talk because you're a little soft-spoken, but you're also opinionated. And you're a well-informed, opinionated person, which is almost an anomaly these days, it feels like. So I did want to mention that to to our listeners. You bring such a breadth of experience to the classes that you teach. So I wanted to give a brief definition of American exceptionalism because I don't think this is a term that we hear very often anymore. And as we're entering our, July 4th is going to be the 250th birthday of America. I love America. I think it's an amazing place to live. Is it perfect? No. But we have so many opportunities in America. We get to choose how we're educated, who we marry, where we live, if we want to travel, how much money we have so many opportunities, and it's such a unique place in the history of all time. So I do believe in American exceptionalism, but I'm going to read a simple definition of what that looks like. American exceptionalism is the belief that the United States occupies a unique place in history, a nation founded on universal ideals of liberty, democracy, and individual rights, and therefore set apart from and to be an example for the world. It can inspire pride and purpose, but it also raises uncomfortable questions about blind spots, contradictions, and who gets to define the American story. Which I think it's interesting that you guys both mentioned the story and how important story is. So, do you both believe America is exceptional and why? And can we continue to be exceptional even in this global post-empire, post-modern, post-2020 world? That's a lot of posts.
Want to go ahead with that, Julia?
Sure. So I think America is exceptional because it is not flawless. We have gone through some really, some big struggles, and we see those in the stories that we read in American literature, like slavery and racism, and just learning how to see everyone as an equal almost. So I think the greatest part is just to see the broken people and the redemption of how broken societies can be restored throughout the process of our growth through the American life and American dream. I mean, it's really so young when you go to other countries and you see how old all of these other places are to see that we do have something really special. But we're still working and we're still growing, right? And I do believe that there is a chance for us to be exceptional at some point.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that because you just got back from a trip to Italy too, didn't you? So you really saw an ancient culture and then to come back and compare and contrast it. That's an interesting thing to do, isn't it?
It definitely is, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, 250 feels so old, right?
Yeah. Till you go to some place that's been around for a couple thousand years.
Yeah. Just to add to what Julia said, I think the big thing that makes America exceptional is our Constitution. It is still the longest standing governing document in all of history that's still active, right? And because of what America guaranteed in our Bill of Rights, it really did become an example to the whole world. It's like freedom started here and it took off as a result of that. Our vision of our founders, right? The things that are enshrined in our Constitution are so valuable to every single person who partakes in them. And the thing that's interesting about our Constitution is it's a living document. So it has grown with us. It has aged and improved with us. And so when you think about fulfilling the idea of exceptionalism, the pilgrim's view, right, of the city on a hill, our Constitution has evolved as we evolve as a people. And so while we think sometimes that maybe the world's too divided or things are too bad or that maybe it's just no good anymore, we should throw it all out, I try to remind my students that division has always been a cycle of history, right? We go through these periods that seem hopeless. And then, as Julia said, there's brokenness, but then there's redemption. And I think back, I always use the example with the kids. Think about a time at the beginning of our of our country when our vice president shot dead the former Secretary of Treasurer, Alexander Hamilton. I mean, think about You want to talk about
That's
division,
crazy, crazy
people
times.
fighting over politics and the
Yeah.
passions that are a part of being human is just part of really every nation's story, but it's our story as well. And so we shouldn't lose hope just because there's been downs. There's always ups on the other side of that. I truly believe that. And it's because of the way our Constitution was structured that we can grow and evolve with better ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I think so too. Anything you'd add to that, Julia? Or
I think there's so many of the stories that we read in our class that really represent that and show that to the kids in a, an interesting way and an entertaining way, but also a way that teaches them about the depth of those struggles that have happened throughout history.
yeah, yeah, I agree. I love historical fiction for that very reason is that you get a good view of what's happening historically, but also some of the humanity in it too that I'll just say one of the most profound book series I ever read was in high school. I read John Jakes, this is how old I am, series of 1776. And the
Yeah.
theme of that book was take a stand and make a mark. And
Mhm.
literally that has been like one of the phrases I look to in my life. Like it's no good to just go through life just having things happen to you. Take a stand. And people aren't going to like you for it. You're going to get a lot of flack. You might get shot at. But in the end, you've made a mark. You know what I mean? So I think historical fiction too, and I think you're reading maybe some primary documents, but it can have a really profound impact on our kids as well. So that leads me to another thought is that so many cultural narratives about America frame it as a land of second chances. We hear about this with, people coming over here and why they want to come here and make the sacrifices to come here. And there's a lot of optimism about that, but there's a lot of hidden costs to starting over. Do you have those kind of discussions in your classes? Like, you're coming over here for opportunity, but what do you leave behind? And I think that's part of the fabric of America is that as people have come over here and started over, they have left things behind. And we've
Mhm.
all started over at some point. I just think of our house fire in 2009. We lost 90% of what we owned and we rebuilt our house from the studs up. And it was such a pivotal moment, kind of like 2020 for a lot of people, where everything that had happened is not going to happen because you don't have the resources and the stuff. So there's cost to that too. Do you guys address that in your classes? What are the costs people and the sacrifices people make to be part of America? And does it always work out for them?
It's interesting. I haven't thought about that. Does it always work out for them part? I mean, it is definitely a natural part. So the class that I teach is American history and film. So we watch a lot of it through feature films. And there's definitely, Hollywood's had a lot of fun with that part of it. They like to show the story of the underdog. But I think it's a great idea, the exploring. We look at that, of course, initially with the pilgrims, right? Many of them perished on the boat. They never even saw America. And then the ones that got here as they began to move west perished in the wilderness. We had entire um, settlements that just went away and no one knows exactly where the
Yep.
people went. So there was a great cost and a great risk. And then of course, as we continued to expand west, the attrition continued. So I think the students are well aware of that, but it's really something they're never going to connect with fully since they have never gone through those kinds of struggles. But
Yeah.
I do think they appreciate that what they were coming from, the chaos of what they were leaving was worth it to them. It was
Mm,
that big of a change. And so I think that's a great message, even when you think about it from a meaning of a believer for our faith, is that what
mm,
are we willing to leave behind and to count dead in order
mm.
to look to something new. And so the real cycle of history is, again, going back to that idea of brokenness and
Yeah.
redemption. And I want to say one more thing. There's this myth that we study history so we won't repeat.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of history, we talk about that. And I always ask the students, why do we study history? And they all say that, right? Which
Yeah.
is what you would expect. And then I show them this video that shows how literally everything that's happened in history is
Repeats.
basically repeated itself over and over and over. And some people say, no, it doesn't repeat exactly, it rhymes. Okay, that's fine
Yeah.
too.
That's
Maybe
awesome.
that's true. But the idea is that people really haven't changed
Yeah.
And so the real value of history is just sort of figuring out who we are and what our
Yeah.
values are, because we will continue to be human and continue to do the same things over and over and over in history. And maybe we'll glean little bits that'll keep us from repeating maybe big missteps, but generally it's more of a personal experience. I don't think globally mankind has figured that out yet. We just kind of keep stepping in the same pothole. So anyway, I'll let Julia say what she thinks about that.
When I think that we read a lot of stories in American literature that do show maybe not a second chance, but show that redemption. Like Mark Twain works so hard to show how yucky and ugly slavery and racism was. And if my students come out of the class and say, well, that book was all, that was, a racist book, I think, wow, you totally missed the point, because he was taking something so ugly and then redeeming it for something new, for America to have a new beginning with slavery and racism. And so I think that that's so important for the kids to see that, just like Mark Twain, you could take what you see in America and you can do something else with it. We use lost tools of writing in my class. And so there's lots of questions and thinking through, should this person have done this, or should we question this part, and is this right? So I do think that gives the students a real chance to see up close some things that they can pull, some lessons that they can learn, and some things they can pull from that.
I love it. I love the skills you use in Lost Tools, because it is critical thinking tools that you can use. We've used Annie charts for years in our home for different situations, but you touched on something really important, and that is that history contextualizes. And Angie, you touched on this too. It contextualizes. So our kids are not just dropped into the universe for no purpose and meaning. And we're seeing such a rise in anxiety and depression amongst our youth. I think it's because they don't have a solid context of why are they here? What is the purpose of their life? What is the meaning of their life? And history shows them that even the smallest character has meaning and purpose, even if it's a plot twist kind of thing, but a plot device. But I do think history really contextualizes things for our kids, both in the past and now. And, science fiction can even do that for the future. So helping our kids understand the importance of history in that way, even if we don't state it to them, can really provide some purpose and meaning for them in an age of true anxiety and depression amongst our kids. So I love that you touched on that. You also touched on something I want to really talk about, because, there's, as we enter this time of celebrating America and its 250th, we're going to hear a lot about patriotism, and it's tied up in mythology. And if it's tied up in the mythology of our country, does that even make it important? Is it worth it? Is it worth being patriotic if it's just all a myth? And I have real opinions about that. What do you guys think? The myth of America and tying it into patriotism, and what should we do with all of that? And how do we address that with our kids?
I think we have to study history, warts and all, right? But we also have to understand that humanity is always about trade-offs. And so when you think about, okay, the first conversation we have in class is America stolen land, right? What happened when we came to America, we being our founders, and they displaced the people that were here, correct? And so wasn't that a cost, a great cost, a very inhumane situation and a cost? Was there a benefit? Yes, there was a benefit ultimately to the entire globe. But yeah, it didn't come without cost, and we don't diminish that, and we don't forget that cost. Same with slavery. That was a huge cost. Did we pay for that? Yes, we shed our own blood in the most bloody war of all of our history for that sin. And so again, cost. As we were forming as a nation, the slaves were part of that vision, and they suffered, and they shouldn't have. So there was the cost. But then again, the war was part of that as well. And then you look at things like the internment of the Japanese during World War, right? We sent our sons and daughters to end fascism in the world, but yet in our own home, we were enslaving people simply because they were the wrong race out of fear. So I think I'm always framing that in my history class of looking at there's trade-offs. There's these great things that America did. And there were these other things that were a cost of that. And it's never going to be as clean. I tell the kids all the time, well, I got bad news for you. You are now in the age where stories don't always have a happy ending. So it's kind of like I remember with my kids the first time we read a fictional story that ended like Old Yeller, right? Where, prior to that, all the stories were lived happily ever after. And then they had that and they're like, Mom, this was the worst story ever. And it's that coming of age, correct? Where we have to begin to not just look at all of the heroic happy endings, but we also have to realize all the costs that came from that. And so we never diminish those, but it doesn't also diminish the good. I think I want the kids to understand that we do live in an age where the good has been diminished and the other has been elevated. Both are equally important to look at. And so I'm not afraid to be patriotic or to count those costs as part of the gain. That's the human experience.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. Julia, what do you think?
I think that mythology avoids complexity, but I think patriotism seeks truth. And that's really what I want the kids to see is what truth is.
Yeah.
And we read some stories that I would not be friends with these authors. Like these are not people I would want to hang out with. I would not want to ever. I love Hemingway and I love to read him, but he is not someone I would probably ever have a conversation with. And so I think about when we read these stories that they've written, we're having a conversation with them, but we're allowing our kids to see it through the eyes of truth. We can see their flaws. We can see what they have to say that we don't appreciate or don't like. At the same time, we can learn how to have a conversation with others that disagree with us, because I believe in this world that our kids are they're going to have a lot of people that they disagree with. And I think they need to learn how to have those conversations. And I think that's so important as we have conversations with authors that we don't really particularly like, but they do teach us. I mean, if we didn't read Hemingway, we wouldn't understand how dense and how packed he can put things into a sentence that would take most of us paragraphs to do. So I love his work, but he's not someone that I would really want to be friends with. So I really do think there's a very interesting, important part of reading American literature and the classics for that reason.
I love it. And I love that you said that. And I really appreciate that you said myth kind of diminishes the nuance. Because if you just think about George Washington and the myths surrounding him, it makes him kind of a simple character. And yet he was truly exceptional. He could have been king and he turned it down and he said, no, we're doing something new and unique. That is an exceptional human being. And so some of the myths surrounding George Washington elevates him to a simple character so we can really appreciate what an exceptional person he was, because most people would have said, yeah, I'll take the throne. I'll create a family franchise for myself that lasts generations or whatever. And he said, no, I'm going to go back and be a farmer. So I love that. That's a great definition of mythology. I think it does remove some of the nuance. But as you study history, as our kids get older, just like Angie said, really getting into the nuance, we don't always have happy endings. And how do we keep standing at in the cost of an unhappy ending? I think that's, Thessalonians says at the end be found standing, which assumes we're all going to fall down. And so if we can teach our kids, like the big goal is to keep standing. So you have to get up when you're knocked over. And that again is contextualization of history. It teaches us those kind of things that as a nation, the Civil War, that knocked us down. Some parts of the country are still reeling from that, and they haven't really fully recovered. So, but we're still standing, and I think that's an important lesson for our kids to really take from history and reading those authors that we don't agree with. Agreed. Some authors I wouldn't want to be friends with or even have a conversation with, but they bring value. And I think that's an important thing to think about too. We don't have to agree with everybody we watch or listen to. And as our kids get older, It's so important for us to have those conversations. What did we not like about this? What is not a good takeaway? How would we live different, even as the author? And one of the things I love about your classes is that you guys go in depth into who is doing the writing. What was their motivation for doing the writing? It's not just read the book, good luck to you, and now write a paper. You're really getting into the motivations behind the authors and why they're writing and doing some lit analysis. And I think that just builds out the breadth and richness of the classes in so many great ways. So, as we approach the 250th, are there any stories or voices that you think deserve more attention? I know you guys have both taught American Lit and Comp and American History for a couple years now. I don't even remember how many, but it's been 3 to 5, I think. And so you've done 5. Wow, Angie. And American History with Film is one of our most popular classes, as is American Lit and Comp. You guys have done some deep dives. I know you guys both refresh your classes every single year, and you're always kind of going, do we really want to take this book again, or do we want to reevaluate and bring something else in? Which I appreciate your diligence in that, because the students really do benefit from it. But is there any story that you think we need to really think more deeply about, or a story that we have not even like really touched on that you think more people should be aware of?
Ooh, you want to
I know
start,
that's a loaded
Julia?
question.
I'll let you start.
Okay. I I think a lot of people have read, and probably a lot of parents have read The Scarlet Letter. Like they read it in high school, right? And they read it with a teacher who said, "This is the story. This is, this is what happens." And it's all about judgment, and it's all about all of these things, which is so untrue. I do believe that The Scarlet Letter has some really deep themes about humanity and about redemption and about truth and sin and all of these things that I just think a lot of people miss if you don't read it. If you don't read it deeply and think about what's really going on in the situation,
Mm,
because we all are sinners. Like there's no one
right.
that's not sinning. And in the whole story, I think Hester Prynne is, she seems like she's the one, even though she carries the burden, she is the one that is so sweet and so forgiving. I mean, she's the one who, I don't know. I just feel like after we read that story, all of the kids just loved her
Oh,
just
I'm
because
glad.
of how she dealt with her flaw and how she redeemed herself, I feel like, through it. So
Mhm,
I do think that there's a deeper meaning in that story. And I think there's a deeper meaning in a lot of stories. I don't
mhm,
think the kids understood in Great Gatsby how important it was just to see just how tragic it was, the greed and all of those
mhm,
things. I mean, it
mhm,
is beautiful, but when then you look down deep, you can see the flaws and you can
mhm.
see some serious problems. But
Yeah.
I think that we can find a happy ending, hopefully, in all of these stories because they can end sad.
Yeah. I love The Scarlet Letter. It's one of my very favorite books, because it does take such a tragic situation where somebody is it's so uncomfortable how she's treated, and it's so unfair given the
Mm,
context of the story. We look at it and we go, that is so unfair. And yet in that culture, there was reasons why they were so strict and structured, because people died if it wasn't. I mean, we can't really anachronistic looks at history really bother me when you say I'm postmodern, so everybody should, in their context and world, should have acted in a postmodern. I'm not postmodern really, but with that mindset. And we have to look at history in the context of which it was happening. And I think that story does that really beautifully, but it just brings in the truth of the gospel that even in unfair, unkind, ungodly circumstances, God can still redeem. And if we're humble, even when it's unfair, we can be the hands and feet of God. And so in Christ. And I think that's one of the most beautiful stories of redemption. And it's so beautifully written. So I'm glad you brought that one up. I love that one.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that Hawthorne had a great grandfather or grandfather that was part of the Salem witch trials. So he had some really conflicted,
Wow.
history is a paradox, right? There's so much
Yes.
there to uncover. I was thinking, you mentioned Gatsby, and it made me think about the Gilded Age. Now, what an interesting talk about a paradox. We
Yeah.
had these titans of industry, these robber barons who also were taking advantage of the workers and letting little children die in their factories and running tenement housing because there was this flock of people into the cities, right? And thinking about all of that. And then yet it was a robber baron of the Sears, it was from the Sears and Roebuck founders that built 8,000 schools in the South because when Plessy said separate but equal meant that blacks had to have their own schools, he said, well, then we'll build schools that are equal. And
Yeah.
so there's these weird things in history like that where you see these evil coming from these people and then this goodness too coming from the exact same group, the same people. And that same foundation that he started that built all those state-of-the-art schools in the South funded Mr. Rogers.
Aw, I
And
love
so,
it.
right. And so Mr. Rogers, I think, is kind of one of those redeeming voices of the ages because
For
remember,
sure.
it was Mr. Rogers that always spoke so kindly about everyone and who taught the children to just love each other and to
Yeah.
just be good. And he told them that it was okay if they had feelings, right? And he just did all these great, he was such a positive person. And
Yes.
what did his mother tell him? That when tragedy strikes, to look for the helpers.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of voices I feel like there's a little bit of shortage of those in our modern era, but we can discover them through movies and film and books. They have
Yeah.
lived forever because of that. And
Right.
so, in that way, Julia and I are so lucky because we get to continue to share those voices
Yes.
with the kids, and they can see and they can stand on the shoulders of those individuals and do even
Yeah.
greater things, I think.
I think you bring up an interesting point because right now there's the rise of the anti-hero. I actually wrote a blog post about it because the
Yeah.
anti-hero bothers me. It disturbs me. It's teaching our kids that the bad guy is the hero. And I do think, we have heroes because we want our kids to emulate the good and the beautiful and the true. And I just remember we went to see the Mr. Rogers movie. And there were people crying in the theater, literally crying because
Right.
it showed that his compassion and his humanity
It was
in
deep.
such a beautiful way. And I think there are a lot of helpers in the world now, but they don't get amplified. Those voices do not get
Yes.
amplified. And
Yeah.
the anti-hero voice gets amplified, and that's the loud voice. And we all are overwhelmed with so much input. And that's why I think just the way you guys are running the classes and the heart behind it just allows the kids to slow down and think deeply about some of these ideas, and just what's the difference between myth and the actual history of events, and what is
Mhm.
story and the importance of story, and who should we emulate? Should we really try to be the anti-hero, or should we be the hero or the heroine? I think those are really good questions, and I'm a fan of Mr. Rogers. Like, he was part of my childhood, so yeah. Um, okay, what do you both wish parents understood about how history and literature shape the way their kids see America? We've talked about this obviously throughout this whole podcast, but anything specifically that you wish parents understood about history and literature, how it is shaping the way their kids see America and themselves as
I
young
think
Americans?
yeah, I like the question. I think in my class, because we're looking at film and Hollywood sort of has its own agenda, right? um, I'm trying to teach them how to be savvy consumers of media. And so I guess what I want the parents to know is that every book, every film has, I don't want to say agenda because that makes it sound sketchy, but every author has something they want the viewer or the reader to take away. And I want children to understand how worldview is impacted by that. And this idea that we really need to be savvy consumers of those pieces of
Mhm.
media, We need
Yeah.
to be able to know how to ask the question, what is the author trying to teach me? And I don't want the parents to necessarily think that means that we have to live in a bubble where we only choose stories that are perfectly aligned with our vision. But I mean, I don't want them to avoid those resources that disagree per se, but maybe the ones that strive to undermine truth and
Mm,
wisdom, and the ones that clearly are designed to undermine the concept of goodness and objectivity. And we can do that. We can learn to be really savvy consumers of those stories,
mhm,
and therefore evaluating worldview, learning how to ask ourselves the right questions, and learning how to see the answers to those questions. I think that will make both the children and the parents better consumers of all those things, because that really is the whole purpose of storytelling, right? There's a message,
yeah.
and that's what I want parents to really understand as they look at these materials.
That's excellent. Yeah. Anything, what would you add, Julia?
I think having I've had a couple of kids go off to college, even Christian college, and they've just been rocked. Their world has been rocked because of professors and instructors who have just said things that are not true. And so
Mhm,
I think it's really important that parents really delve into what is true in high school and read things that maybe they disagree with and try to look for truth, like Angie said, through those things so that when they do read things later on or when they read books for entertainment later, that they can pick out those things that they agree with and they'll hold on to, and then those things that they can just let go of because it's not truth. And even if the world tries to tell them, or even Christian people try to tell them one thing or another, they'll know the truth because they've
mhm,
read it and they've understood it in high school, and so then they can use that later on in life.
mhm. I think too, the better the storyteller, the more compelling the story. And when we are confronted with a compelling storyteller, we're like, we get so invested in it. And so if you have a compelling storyteller that is telling something completely untrue or false or wrong or evil or bad, it's easy to get caught into that. We see that in media right now with some of the really good storytellers. They're telling some really bad stories really, really well. And they have huge followers that are just falling into the trap of their ability to tell a beautiful story, even if it's wrong. And so I think, yeah, really helping our kids develop discernment. That's part of, I think that's part of literary analysis is really developing that sense of discernment. And, I hear this all the time from parents. Well, if we do lit analysis, it's going to take away from the enjoyment of the story. But I know we're all shaking our heads going, no, it gives your kids skills so that they can really analyze and enjoy the story at such a deeper level. And it's the critical thinking skills again. Also, it develops communication skills because now you can tell why you like the story or why you didn't like the story. And so, yeah, anything you want to add about lit analysis, I think it's like the scientific method. It's one of the top 10 tools you have got to teach your kids while they're growing up, in my opinion. Any other thoughts about that?
When some, I guess a couple of the kids at the end of the class, they were like, "You let us like not like things," and I was like, "Of course." You have to not like things. Like you're not. I don't want you to like every book that we read. And while I want you to enjoy it, maybe the journey, it's okay to dislike things and for certain reasons. And tell me what those are. So yeah.
That's brilliant, Julia. For a high schooler to be able to articulate that, you let me not like things. As a parent, I'm going, ooh, that kind of hits. Like, are we allowing our kids to have an opinion? And
Mm-hmm.
can they articulate what that opinion is? Again, back to critical thinking skills. But
Mhm.
that also equips our kids when they get out into the world, whether it's college or work, and they're confronted with ideologies and worldviews that go against how we've raised them up. Can they articulate why they don't like it or what pieces they want to integrate into their own life? Because if we can verbalize it, good writing, good speaking has to do with good thinking. And if they can't verbalize it or write it out, they probably have kind of mushy thinking. So,
Yeah,
excellent
they need
point.
they need to be building good appetites, I think, building an appetite for reading, an appetite for truth. And they may not enjoy like Julie said, they're not going to enjoy every story, but they're going to be able to articulate very meaningfully why. And that's a new thing. And that gives them confidence. And when they're confident, then they get even more interested in learning and build that appetite to know what am I doing? Why am I doing it? What is true? What is real? What is good? And so yeah, the disliking is part of that process just as much. I think modern education is a lot about compliance, and I hate to say it, but I think most teachers are great people, but there are certainly a number of teachers out there who are ideologues, who are trying to get students to think a certain way versus just teaching them how to formulate ideas and thoughts on their own, and to critically consider their viewpoints, and to be willing to dissect why they believe what they believe, is going to be important, so they don't have an experience like Julia described, where they go off to college and as soon as it's challenged, they give it up because they don't know why. So I do think I think that's a big push right now. I see that a lot from parents. I love that you're learning, that my kids are learning critical thinking in your class. I love that you're pushing back against ideas with them. When they answer a question, you're saying, are you sure? Because they need to do that now before they get out into the world, where they're definitely going to get. And the big myth, the big idea right now that I'm seeing is this idea that socialism is a super great idea.
Yeah.
It's just infected every institution. And so when we come into class and we learn together, in my class in American history, they'd see right away they have not learned the truth about socialism. And let's just dispense with that right away. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people murdered by their own leadership under socialism. No, it's not a better idea. But how would you know the difference if you didn't get time to dissect that? And so I do think the public schools pick and choose, and they've selectively taught kids certain things instead of just saying, here's the whole pie, and then and they're smart enough, they can figure that out, what the good pieces are. I believe it. I believe that.
I think so too. That's a good segue into, what do you guys think? What perspectives or skills from your classes could change the way those conversations happen at home, about things like socialism and communism? What skills are you equipping the students with to have those conversations with their families?
What do you think,
I'm
Julia?
really putting you on the spot here.
I'm thinking, because we read such classic literature, how what we learn. And I know that there are so many things that we could talk about. But I don't know. I have such a strong opinion about this. I'm trying to be very, I don't know, diplomatic.
Just spill it.
Yeah, just go ahead, Julia.
So when I was in college, I went with our church and we went to, I didn't realize it, but how soon after the wall fell, we went to Romania, and it was just, there was so much darkness. And it was just such a place that needed redemption, right? And I just wish every student could go to a different country and see how great America really is, for our freedoms and our rights and all that we have and all that we've been given by our founding fathers. What a gift to live in such a great country.
That's a great, I had two students in my class this year, Julia, whose parents were from Eastern Europe, and they were living there when they were children, when the wall came down, and sometimes those students would speak in class because their parents had definitely educated them to that. And you're right, some things are difficult to articulate in a classroom because you need that firsthand connection. But I think that's another reason why storytelling is so important, because we can vicariously live through those characters, and it does develop empathy in that way, rather than just telling them, hey, this happened. Did you see that this was going on? When you frame it in an actual story with a real human being, or even a fictional human being, but just in that way, they step into those shoes. And I think that really, really makes a difference in terms of them retaining the value of that. And so in that way, they can experience sort of the thing that Julia experienced with Romania. So I hope that parents can appreciate that's kind of what our goal is in setting to try to recreate with their students, that they can get that sense of compassion and empathy for those other human beings. And really, I don't think children can truly understand the present or the future without a strong grasp on the past.
Mhm.
It just provides the context for literally every subject, every topic, every area of life. There really is
Mhm.
nothing that doesn't relate. And it really helps us uncover kind of who we want to be, what our purpose is. And honestly, I think even with all the negatives and difficulties from the past, looking at the Scarlet Letter and injustices, I think it actually gives us hope and purpose,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
we get a sense of what we want to do to make
Mhm.
it better. And what a great thing. You're right. This generation, I think, feels disconnected from that. I think social media has done that, of course, but this they can reconnect with in that way. And so it makes me eternally optimistic.
Yeah. I want to mention a really great tool, and you guys have brought up pieces of it as we've talked, and that is the five common topics. Because I think the
Mhm.
five common topics gives us a great way to really look at history and literature. And that is, if I can remember them all, you guys can help me: relationship, authority, definition, compare and contrast, and circumstance. And we
Very
have an
good.
ebook at, yeah, Rad CC. We have an ebook at True North. You can go download it. I think it's free, or if it's $1.99. There's unit studies in there. One of my sons helped me write it, but we really go through how to use the five common topics for every subject. And it's perfect for lit and history, because you can really, it's kind of like a basic lit analysis of what's going on, what's the context, compare and contrast. How do you compare your life to Hester Prynne's? Wow, so many differences, right? And so it's a really great simple tool. It's a simple but super effective tool, like literary analysis, like the scientific method. And I think as parents, if we have that, we can apply that to so many different things. Um, I listened to a podcast last night, and the the gentleman was saying when the middle class shrinks, people get very worried, and that's when they turn to socialism and communism. And I thought that was an interesting perspective. I hadn't really thought about that before, because I'm a firm believer in middle class. It changes everybody's life, it elevates everybody, it equalizes, and middle class is such a broad range from, barely out of, living on the edge to real wealth, honestly. And so I think it's important to look at helping our kids understand the importance and value of the middle class lifestyle, because we are bombarded so much with literature and film that's current about how if you're not just wealthy or living this like designer lifestyle, you haven't really attained anything. But if you look throughout history and all time, as middle class Americans, we live better than most kings throughout all of history. And wow, I've mentioned that in my workshops the last couple of years, and everybody just kind of goes, wow. You can buy a plum in winter. You have air conditioning. I was outside in the Florida sun for 4 hours yesterday, during the middle of the day. And let me tell you, I came back, and I really appreciated the air conditioning here and the cold running water and the ice cubes and all the things. So, yeah, the whole socialism, communism, uh, conversation, we'll have those conversations at True North, absolutely. And we'll also say capitalism is really helpful for everybody around the world. So we're pro capitalism here. I just want to, throw that out there, that is, I think it's really beneficial to everybody, and so is the middle class. So,
I mean,
um,
we're the first to have a middle class, right? I mean, when
right.
Marx cooked up socialism, there wasn't even such a thing. I mean, America is where the middle class began. And I would push back on what he said a little bit, because I don't think it's the shrinking middle class that does it. I think it's the growing upper class, because
Mhm.
when you have a lot of wealth, then the disparity between classes is
Mhm.
more evident. And
Yes.
so it is true, though, when more of those people are absorbed into the middle, the disparity seems less. And so it's optical in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, because there's always been poor. The Bible tells
Mhm.
us there'll always be poor among us. And it is our obligation as Christians to always take care of them. And unfortunately, we've abdicated that to the government, which I
Right.
think is a major problem and a failure. But I'm going to push back on him on that. I honestly think that it's the disparity between the two classes that really cause people to think, oh, this is creating poor people, when in fact There's
Mhm.
always been that. And you're right, the middle class, 80% of the world still lives below what our just regular middle class is. And
Yeah.
I don't think people statistically, numbers don't,
Right.
they're not very, very appealing to people, but we're very, very lucky. And you're
Mhm.
right, we do live like kings. But yeah, I'm reading this. I'm always reading something, and I'm a nerd. So I'm reading some book from 1700 on economics. And, this was before there was anything such as a middle class. And he talks about this idea of what really happens is that when you begin to build prosperity in a country, then people start looking. And because socialism is a doctrine of envy,
Mhm.
people start looking more at that and saying, oh, those people are rich, that there's a tragedy here because there's still all these poor people. If everybody was poor, nobody talks like
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
it's
That's
just
a great point.
a weird thing. Like nobody talks about socialism when everybody's poor, only
Yes.
when there's just a few rich people, because
Yeah.
it's a mentality of envy instead. And if you study history at all, you know that wealth does not bring happiness. And we study so many characters in our timeline where they were really wealthy and they did not have things figured out. And that's another myth, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Great point. Great point. Well, and I mean, that's a good point. I'm gonna have to mull that over. I'm not saying I agree with him, but I just hadn't heard it phrased that way. So,
Yeah,
points
I
to
mean,
consider.
he's
Yeah,
raising a
yeah,
very important point though, but it still goes back to that psychology of envy. It really
it
does.
does. Yeah, that's a
And
great
as
way to put
Christians, we're
it.
called to be better than that anyway. So I hope, I
Yeah.
think this year I've spent more time in class talking about the idea of materialism, and when as a nation we began to become more materialistic and less spiritual. And it really did start at the Industrial Revolution. It really ramped up after World War II.
Yeah.
We did a deep dive into Edward Bernays this year because he was sort of the father of marketing. And
Mhm.
I think that, I think the kids really started to understand a lot more contextually and what it means to have a materialistic view of the world and how much that takes the focus off of what you're supposed to be on. So
Mhm.
hopefully.
Yeah. Lots to think about with that,
Oh, so
Angie. Oh my
much.
gosh. Yeah. No,
It's a
that's
deep
great.
one.
I love that you're talking to the kids about marketing because it is so important that we are being marketed to, or our data is what is being marketed. I mean, this whole where we're at right now is there's nothing new under the sun, and yet we're in a really unique time of history, I think.
Yeah.
I love history and so I've studied it quite a bit, but I do think having those conversations with the kids is important to them because they need to realize that they might be being played. And how do you protect yourself from being played? That's an important point. And I mean, that is throughout all time, like from Hester Prynne and before, like that's just part of human nature is to see what you can get over on people, unless you have an external, perspective of you're following the Bible and following the Lord. And so it's not just about what you can get out of people or whatever. So that's fantastic. Um, what, if you guys could choose one film or one novel that you think best captures America from 1776 to 2026, can you narrow it down to one? And I was thinking about this and I'm like, man, I don't know. But that's a tough one.
It's a terrible question.
I know. Okay, what's your favorite then? Let's go with that.
Well, my favorite is one I can't show in class because it's rated R.
Oh, but you can
But
tell us, we're adults.
Saving Private Ryan.
Oh yeah, that's a tough one, but it's really good.
And it's
Yeah.
interesting because in the movie, the main character, Tom Hanks, he actually quotes Lincoln because, their mission is to save this young man because he's the last person in the family. And Lincoln
Yeah.
had that same thing happen in the Civil War where he had to go and he wrote a letter to the mother.
Yeah.
And so that's brought back into the movie. So it's this
Oh.
great tying of these ideas together before and after of the idea that America believes in the value of individuals.
Mhm.
That is a huge, and they're willing to send 10 people to die to save
Yes.
one person. But there's a reason why that's an important value. And I think that,
Yes.
I don't know, that one movie does bring that home very, very well.
I think it's not just about that one person, it's about the legacy of the family. If all the sons die, they have no grandchildren.
And but
And
also when he says at the end, earn this,
yes,
my
yeah.
students caught that what he was saying there was not just for that man, but for every person who lived after that war to
Mhm,
live in earning of that
mhm. Yeah,
death, that moment. I don't know. The fact that they caught that, I just wanted, because I had a couple students who did that as their, they're all allowed to do a film analysis at the
yeah,
end of their choice. And with permission, they can do a
yeah.
movie like that. And a couple of them did that movie and they caught it.
Wow,
And I was like,
that's
yes.
awesome. I
So
love it.
but I mean that I can't say that's my all time because there's just no such thing, but
And
it's
it's
pretty
always a
powerful.
changing list, right?
Yeah. Go
Julia,
ahead,
is there
Julia. Sorry.
anything that jumps out for you?
I really, and I'm really sad to say this, but and I probably have read it before, and that there's so many books. It's really hard to choose. But I just really loved I loved Mark Twain's Huck Finn. There was just so much freedom and there's fun in it, but then there's also so much truth that
Yeah.
that he reveals to the reader. So
Yeah.
so for this year, it's been Huck Finn.
For
That's
this
been my
year.
favorite. Yeah.
She's like, I'm not going beyond this year. This year it was Huck Finn. Those are two
Yeah.
great. Those are great. I love Mark Twain. He's such a quirky author, and he really does bring you into the story. You can, I mean, I grew up in Ohio, but reading it as a kid, you're like, wow, is this what the swamps are like? Like, there's alligator, he's just such a beautiful
And
storyteller.
it's
So,
hilarious
yeah,
while attacking such serious topics. I just
it
his
is.
And
characters are just so endearing.
Yeah.
he teaches so much empathy too. I mean, I think he teaches the reader like how to empathize and how to
Yeah.
see each individual as a person who
Yeah.
has so many things, so many qualities. So
Yeah. Great pick. Okay, gals, as we wrap up, is there a parting thought you want to leave with parents as they approach American history or Lit and Comp? And especially this year, is there anything that you just want them to realize as they're exploring options for teaching American history or literature and what they should be aware of?
Go ahead, Julia.
this is hard. I think it's so important for kids to read certain books just so that they understand culture. I think
Mhm.
in To Kill a Mockingbird, there's like 200 references to To Kill a Mockingbird in pop culture. How lost are
So
you if
true.
you've not read To Kill a Mockingbird? So
Yeah.
there are books and all over that we read that really help kids back up all of the things that they're going to need
Mhm.
to live a life and to understand on just on any television show or anything. Even SpongeBob did a whole thing on the Telltale Heart, and the kid when I showed it to the kids, they were like, "What?
What?
Now we understand." So there's
And
just so many references.
and you're referencing the great conversation. When we give our kids the ability to read and watch great literature and great words, we're helping them be part of the great conversation throughout all time. What a gift, because they can think more deeply and more broadly about so many different things. Again, back to that critical thinking. I've been hearing, I know Angie and I have talked about this, and Julia, we've kind of touched on it. There's a phenomenon called brain rot right now where kids are just scrolling, and this next generation, their IQs are literally lower. They're having a hard time reading novels. A lot of high schools are just taking novels out of their curriculum because the kids can't read them. And when you're just reading snippets of a novel, you're not getting the overarching themes. You're not understanding the depth and breadth of the human condition. And again, history, it teaches context, and our kids are really becoming decontextualized by these short form reels and the scrolling and all the things. So parents, get your kids off devices this summer and give them some great books. If your kids don't like to read, here's an easy solution. Read the book to them.
They love that
They don't
always.
have to be little kids to read out loud to them. Some of my kids, even as young adults, would read to each other books. They would share books and just read snippets to each other or read the books to each other. And I think that's really, it's such a bonding experience. You have that shared conversation. One of the things I miss the most from my older sister having passed away is that we used to share books all the time. We would send them back and forth to each other, and I don't have that person in my life anymore. So who do I share the good book with? Well, that's why I always telling teachers, here's a good book. But I think having that context is really good for our kids' brain development. It's good for their personality development. It teaches emotional IQ. It teaches critical thinking, communication. It can be collaborative because, again, you're part of the great conversation. And these are all life skills our kids really, really need in an AI-rich world. They're not going to be behind if they don't learn how to get on a device and scroll. They'll be fine. I grew up without internet and I own some online businesses. So you don't have to grow up with it to know how to figure it out. You need to know how to learn, which is what both of your classes teach. So before we go, thanks for the great conversation. Tell us a little bit about the American History through Film class and the American Lit and Com class. Again, these are some of our most popular classes at True North for very good reason, but I want you to hear from Angie and Julia about their classes.
Okay, so American History and Film, we use no textbooks. I do use some articles online, but mostly all online videos and reels, short reels for a weekly timeline. And then we use feature films, which we analyze. And so all of history is taught through the context of these various forms of film. And the students are asked very deep, critical questions about the films and about the context, about the characters, why they were presented the way they were. And they do this all throughout the year. So by the end of the year, it is absolute transformation that I see in every student in their ability to really articulate the messaging, the value, what they got from the story. Well, I'm basically using literary analysis only on films, and then they do their own analysis at the end. We also do some fun things. We do a campaign ad. The way the year hits right about mid-year, it's the election of 1848 when it was like mudslinging galore. So I said, let's create campaign ads. And so they do their own campaign ads and learn a little bit about that concept of how marketing and politics work. But we also do weekly discussions, and they're very collegiate in that they do a post online for all their classmates to read. Everybody reads each other's posts, and then they respond. And at first they bellyache about it terribly, right? And by mid year, they're like doing so great and loving it and really replying to each other and answering questions. And I think at the very end, the feedback that I get is always, I really didn't want to do that. And at the end, I really appreciated how you made me think about history and not just answer fill in the blanks. So that's what we do. We have a lot of great rich discussions in class, and we have some normal stuff that we do too, quizzes and study guides. But we try to really take that framing of film and make it central and just have some fun with it while we're learning some pretty deep and hopefully inspiring things too through our American timeline.
I love it. What you just described is why it's one of the most popular classes at True North. Thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
American Lit and Com. Julia, you've taught this class for a couple years now.
I have. I think it is so much fun. So we read all the great classics. We read The Scarlet Letter. We read Gatsby and Huck Finn and To Kill a Mockingbird and The Old Man and the Sea, which the boys love, the fishing story. But we do mock trial, which really helps set up a lot of the lost tools of writing, the questions and the debate of. We do mock trial. We put the narrator of the Telltale Heart on trial, and the kids love that. They just beg to do that. It's so much fun. We do a radio show with The Great Gatsby. We have each of the kids play the four main characters, and then the rest of the class act as a radio show and pelt them with questions like, "Why did you let her drive the car?" and "What were you thinking when you did this?" Which also helps the kids generate questions for essays as well. But we have a lot of fun, and I think I threw in some transcendental reading this year just to see if it was fun. And the kids loved it. They loved to see how pop culture and transcendentalism just go hand in hand together. And just to recognize so much of that thinking
Yes,
is popular.
it
So I
is.
think
Yeah.
it was super fun to do that. But I want my kids to come away thinking literature is fun and writing is something that I can do easily with confidence. And I do believe that most of the kids will come away thinking, oh, I can totally write, a 5 paragraph essay. I've been
Yeah.
writing 9 paragraph essays all semester or all year. So that sounds easy. So I just think that I don't know. I think writing and reading great literature is very important.
You guys, Julia, your class is so unique, and you guys are both using traditional assessment tools, but you're also very project based. I get this question all the time. Okay, are my kids going to just sit and watch a talking head and fill in the blank and answer questions and quizzes and tests? And these classes go so far beyond that, it's not even funny. The fact that you do a mock trial online is just incredible. The Telltale Heart Project cracks me up. I think it's fantastic. I want to mention something else before we go. We do work with co-ops and class days, and we have every year since we started in 2018. Julia actually did American Lit and Comp last year with a co-op. So if you have a co-op and a group of kids who you want an expert teacher, if you want a subject matter expert to come to your co-op or class day, you can just email us or call us. Our information is on the website at True North Homeschool Academy, and we're happy to talk with you. We give a group discount, and you get our amazing teachers for your local class. It's a win-win. And Julia, I know you've done that a couple times, and you had a blast doing it, didn't you? It was a fun group last year, wasn't it?
It really was fun. And it was fun that they kind of knew each other. They
Yeah,
had a little bit of background on each other at the same time. We had a couple of other students join in, which
yeah,
I really feel like helped too. So.
yeah. And we're going to do that again this year with American Lit and Comp. So let us know. Angie and Julia, I think the world of both of you. I'm so honored that you've chosen to work with True North and teach at True North and be part of our amazing cohort of teachers. You guys bring so much value to our community. So thank you for choosing to be at True North and for your friendship too. I just value both of you so much. So you guys, if you have any questions, we'll put links to the classes. We listed some other just ideas and stuff, and I'll list those in the show notes. If you have any questions about either class, we would love to chat with you. And again, it's really doable to homeschool. You can do it confidently, competently, and even contentedly. It's a beautiful way to raise your kids, and it's a beautiful way to spend your time as well. So hopefully we'll talk to some of you soon. And if you have any questions, let us know.